What would you do if a body that had been dead for 12 hours started acting like it was still alive on your table? I'm not talking about a random twitch or a bit of gas. I mean fresh, bright blood and muscles that move with purpose. My name is Dr. Jamie Carriton. I'm a board-certified forensic pathologist. I became fully certified in 2011 after finishing a forensic pathology fellowship at the Office of the Chief Medical Investigator in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Before that, I earned my MD at the University of Colorado School of Medicine and completed a 4-year anatomic pathology residency at the University of Washington Medical Center in Seattle. For 11 years, I worked at the Pine Ridge County Medical Examiner's Office in Fairview, Colorado. It's a mid-sized county along the Front Range, about 600,000 people. We averaged around 350 autopsies a year. Highway crashes on I-25, drunk drivers, oil field accidents, gunshot homicides, overdoses. Quiet, natural deaths where someone died alone in a small apartment and no one noticed for several days. In that time, I opened well over 2,000 bodies. I weighed hearts and lungs, cut out brains, traced bullets through ribs and skulls, peeled back burned skin to find fractures hidden underneath. I testified in court so often I lost track. I knew the smell of fresh blood, the look of old clots, the feel of every major organ in my hands. I believed I understood death more completely than almost anyone. I trusted the systems that say when a person has crossed the line, the ACLS code algorithms, the EEG criteria for brain death, the state laws that spell out who can pronounce and when. In my mind, once the heart stopped and the brain went dark, what followed was just chemistry and physics. No mystery, no second chances, no gray area. I also believed my work was clean, in its own way. The living can lie, bodies can't. If you listen closely to them, they tell you what happened. On the 18th of February 2022, the body of a 59-year-old woman named Marion Duffy came onto my table. 4 months later, I turned in my resignation. I have not stepped inside a morgue since. I used to be sure death was a line. Now I'm not convinced it's even a boundary at all. If hearing a forensic pathologist admit they're no longer sure where death actually starts unsettles you even a little, that's exactly why you shouldn't just click away and forget this. Hit subscribe now so this story doesn't just fade like a half-remembered nightmare. And if you still don't want to subscribe, drop a comment and tell me what's holding you back. The autopsy suite at Pine Ridge sat 2 floors below ground in the old county hospital. You reached it by taking a service elevator past laundry and storage until the doors opened onto a concrete hallway that always smelled like cold air and bleach. Our door was at the end of that hall, heavy gray steel, no window with a badge reader and keypad that logged every entry and exit by name, time, and date. Inside, the main room was a bright, cold box of tile and stainless steel. It was about 25 by 20 feet, with 3 steel tables in a row, each under its own adjustable surgical light. The tables sloped toward floor drains, so blood and fluids never pooled where we worked. One wall held deep sinks and sprayers for washing everything down. Above them, open shelves stored specimen buckets, bottles of fixative, and red biohazard containers. The opposite wall was lined with cabinets and drawers full of tools, scalpels, forceps, scissors, rib shears, brain knives, and oscillating saws for opening skulls and thicker bone. A big wall clock ticked loud in the quiet, and cameras near the ceiling recorded certain cases, mostly homicides. Behind a glass wall, a narrow viewing area held 2 short rows of chairs. Detectives, residents, students, and sometimes lawyers sat there to watch. They saw the clean side of the work with steady hands, measured voices, not the way the air in the room sometimes felt heavy, like it was pressing in on your skin. The colder heart of the office was through an insulated side door, the walk-in cooler. It was roughly 15 by 10 feet, with metal racks on both sides, 4 levels high, each level holding a single gurney. A rolling ladder reached the upper shelves. A digital panel above the door showed the temperature, which was always around 38 degrees, and stored alarms if it drifted. There was a second badge reader on that door, and a separate log for anyone who went inside, in case questions about tampering or evidence ever came up. The cooler was almost always silent. You heard only the low hum of the compressor and the faint rattle of the fan. The fluorescent lights were flat and even, with nowhere for shadows to hide. Covered forms lay on their racks, tags at their toes, waiting for us to come and read what their bodies had to say. For years, I thought of those rooms as places of order. Someone's worst day came in zipped inside a bag, and we turned it into facts on a report. That made sudden death and violence feel, if not acceptable, at least understandable. Looking back now, I realized something I ignored at the time. I almost never went into the cooler alone, unless I had a reason. I told myself it was because of the cold. The truth is, on certain nights, standing between those racks, I was sure I could feel eyes on me from under the sheets. I called it imagination back then. I don't call it that anymore. Marion K. Duffy was 59 years old. According to the hospital report, she had collapsed at home while watching television. Her husband found her slumped sideways on the couch at 9:23 p.m. On the 17th of February 2022, he called 911 immediately. Paramedics arrived at 9:31 p.m. They found her unresponsive, not breathing, with no pulse. They started chest compressions, incubated her, and attached the heart monitor. At first, the rhythm was ventricular fibrillation, fast, chaotic, no useful pumping. They shocked her twice. She slid into a useless electrical pattern and then into a flat line. They followed the standard code protocol: epinephrine, amiodarone, compressions, no spontaneous pulse. When they reached Fairview Memorial Hospital, the emergency physician, Dr. Caleb Winters, continued the efforts. Ultrasound during compressions showed no organized heart motion. She never regained a rhythm. He pronounced her dead at 10:04 p.m. The chart was thorough. Flat strips. No corneal reflex. Fixed, dilated pupils. No breathing on her own. On paper, it was a simple, sad, but very common story. Sudden cardiac death in a woman with known heart disease and a pacemaker. Her body arrived at our office at 1:20 inches the morning, sealed in a black body bag with hospital and EMS tags. Our intake tech logged her in as case number 220471 and placed her on rack B 3 inches the cooler. Her autopsy was set for 10 o'clock the next morning. When the diner rolled her gurney into the autopsy room, I checked the wristband and the paperwork. Name, date of birth, case number, all matched. I unzipped the bag and began my routine description, speaking into the mic clipped to my collar. She was 5'5", roughly 165 pounds. Short brown hair with gray streaks. Moderate rigor mortis in her limbs and jaw. Deep purple discoloration along her back and the backs of her legs, lividity from blood settling, fixed in place, just where it should be after 12 hours on her back in the cooler. Her skin was cool and a little waxy. Her eyes were slightly open, corneas cloudy, which is normal. There were rectangular red marks on her chest from CPR compressions, faint pad outlines from the defibrillator, and a healed scar under her left breast where the pacemaker had been placed. No bruises, no cuts, no signs of assault. Nothing strange. If you'd asked me right then how I felt about the case, I would have said one word: routine. At 10:12 a.m., I started the Y-shaped opening cut across her chest and down her abdomen. The blade moved through skin and the fat below. I folded the flaps back and clipped them away from the ribs. I took the rib shears and cut through the front portions of the ribs, left, then right. The usual crunch. I lifted the breastbone as a single plate and set it aside above her head. I expected the usual quiet chest cavity, maybe some fluid, dark lungs, a heart resting in place. Instead, bright red blood surged up from the space in front of the heart and spilled over the cut ribs. It was not dark, thick, settled blood. It was the color you see in a living artery. It rose in small waves, not in one lazy ooze, like something inside still had pressure. I grabbed suction and cleared the view. I expected to see some obvious cut vessel. Nothing jumped out. The blood seemed to seep from the surface of the sac around the heart, which bulged slightly under it. There is no good reason for blood 12 hours after legal death to look that fresh or act like it still has pressure behind it. I checked, because I had to. I wiped my gloves and put my stethoscope on her open chest wall over the sack. Silence. No heart sounds. No whisper of flow. I felt for a carotid pulse. Nothing. I lifted a lid and shined a penlight in. The pupils stayed wide and dull. Every test we used to say, "This person is gone," the blood in her chest did not seem to agree. I cut carefully into the pericardium, the thin sac around the heart. It should feel tough, but still like tissue. My blade hit something that felt like hard plastic. It scratched the surface, but barely broke through. I pressed harder. The blade slipped instead of biting. I swapped for a new blade. Same result. Emma, my tech, watched my face. "Could it be heavy calcification?" she asked. "That can happen, especially in valves and arteries." "Not like this," I said. I tried a heavy scissors. The jaws clicked against the thick area and did nothing. After some effort, I found a thinner spot off to the side where I could open a small window. I took a sliver for later study. The main part over the center stayed stubborn, like a cover made of stone. By the time we finished examining around it, the suction container held half a liter of that bright red fluid. As I was feeling the heart through the gap, Emma spoke again. "Jamie," her face. I looked up. Marion's head rested on the plastic block we used to tilt the neck. Her mouth was closed. For a second, I saw nothing. Then the muscles along her jaw tightened. Her lips pressed together as if she'd clenched her teeth. The sides of her face drew in. After a few seconds, the tension eased. This was not a little twitch from escaping gas. This was a slow, controlled clench and release. I heard my own voice say, "Post-mortem muscle spasm." That's the phrase we use when muscles fire as they run out of stored energy after death. It does happen. It had never looked that intentional before. We checked again. No pulse. No sounds. Only that impenetrable heart and the memory of a jaw that had moved even though nothing alive should have been left to move it. We finished the exam as best we could. The lungs were heavy and wet, but not destroyed. The coronary arteries had some plaque, but not the kind that always leads to instant death. There was nothing that fully explained why she died when she did. The heart itself felt normal on the outside, but inside that central part of the left ventricle, the pump that does the most work, my blade refused to pass. I wrote it up in very polite, careful language. Marked increase in firmness in central left ventricular myocardium with resistance to standard dissection. I did not write. It felt like concrete. We put her organs back, sutured her chest and abdomen, washed her skin, closed her eyes, and lay her on a clean sheet. I told Emma to tag her and return her to rack B3. She would be released to the funeral home that afternoon. As I scrubbed my hands at the sink, I told myself I had just seen an odd cluster of normal findings. None of them sat comfortably. And nothing prepared me for what we saw the next morning. I came in early the next day to finish some reports before seeing my dentist. It was a little after 7 when I walked into the autopsy area. Emma was waiting just inside the door. She still had her coat on, and she was holding a clipboard like a shield. "Jamie," she said, "can you look at something in the cooler?" Her tone made my throat go dry. We walked down the short hallway. I scanned my badge and opened the cooler door. Cold air pushed out, carrying that familiar mix of plastic, cold metal, and a faint chemical tang. The temperature display read 38 degrees. The trend line was a flat, steady bar. No alarms. The access log showed yesterday's entries and exits. No one had gone in after 4 in the afternoon. No one had opened it overnight. Marion was where we had left her in theory. Rack B3, mid-level, right side. Clean sheet pulled up, tag at her feet. Except she wasn't where we'd left her in reality. When we put her away, she had been flat on her back, arms at her sides, head facing the ceiling. Now, her head was turned to the right, almost as far as it could go, so that her face pointed toward the door. Her right arm was bent, hand resting on her chest. Her left arm hung partly off the side of the rack, fingers curled so that the tips pointed toward the aisle. The sheet under her left shoulder was rucked up in diagonal folds. A faint line creased the skin along the side of her neck, the kind you see when someone sleeps in one position for a long time. "Did anybody move her?" I asked. Emma shook her head. I checked the log. No one opened this door after I left yesterday. We stood there in that white, humming box, our breath fogging faintly in front of us, and stared at a body that had changed posture in a place where nothing is supposed to move without a living person's hands on it. "Take pictures," I said finally. Emma snapped photos from several angles. The position of the head, the arm, the creased sheet. I watched her hands. They were shaking. We eased her body back into a straight position. Her joints were stiff but not impossible to move. We laid both arms at her sides. We smoothed the sheet. As I adjusted it under her chin, I saw that her eyelids were slightly open, not wide. Just enough to show a thin strip of cloudy cornea under each upper lid. I pressed them shut with my fingertips. This time, I felt the faintest resistance, like the tiny muscles around the lids were not fully relaxed. Her eyes stayed closed. I told myself her head could have turned slowly while the sheet under her shifted. I told myself those things because the alternative was worse. 2 days later, her husband and adult daughter came for a formal identification. We have a small room for that. Soft lighting, plain walls, a single gurney behind a partial curtain covering everything from the chest down. I'd prepared Marion more carefully than usual. I put small plastic caps over her eyes, under the lids, dabbed a bit of adhesive along the lashes, combed her hair, and made sure the sutured incision was hidden. Her husband recognized her immediately. He said her name out loud, then clamped his jaw shut like he was trying not to cry. Her daughter stared at her face, as if willing it to change back to the way it had looked when she was alive. As they stood there, Marion's left eyelid fluttered. It lifted by a millimeter or two, just enough for a little more of the cloudy cornea to show, catching a glimmer from the overhead light. Her daughter gasped and took a step back. "Did you see that?" she said. Her eye opened. "It can look that way," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Sometimes, the small muscles relax after death at different times." I reached out, pressed the lid down, held it a second longer, and felt it stick to the cap and glue. We talked for a minute. They asked a couple of questions about getting her body to the funeral home. As I started to pull the curtain back, to give them a little privacy, the lid pulled up again. Slow, as if a sleepy person were trying to open her eyes just a crack. This happened 4 times in the 15 minutes they were in that room. Each time, I reapplied gentle pressure. Each time, someone in the room saw the movement. By the last one, their aunt had joined them and was staring at me like she half expected me to admit we'd made some huge mistake. They left finally, shaken, whispered thank yous, drifting back over their shoulders. On the identification form, I checked the box that said visual ID confirmed by family. There was no box for eyes refused to stay shut. That should have been the strangest thing I saw that month. It wasn't. Imagine standing over someone you love, trying to say goodbye, while their eyelid keeps fighting to open after every doctor has sworn they're gone. If you don't want a watered-down version of stories like this, tap subscribe so you're here for the ones most people never hear about. If Marion had been the only strange one, I might have managed to file her away as a fluke, a mix of weird muscle changes after death, a slippery pericardium, and my own jumpy nerves. 6 days later, another case knocked that idea down. His name was Thomas Grady, 71. He was a retired electrician, poorly controlled diabetes, high blood pressure, a stent in his right coronary artery. He collapsed at a grocery store checkout line at 5:17 p.m. Bystanders started chest compressions. Paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. They worked him for over 20 minutes on the floor. He never regained a pulse. Under our state's protocol, an EMS physician on the radio pronounced him dead at 5:49 p.m. Our office took the case because it was a sudden, unexpected death outside a hospital. His body arrived just after 7. I autopsied him at 9 the next morning. Outside, Thomas looked exactly like what he was, an older man who'd fallen to the floor, a few scrapes, settled lividity along his back, rigor in his jaw and limbs. Inside, he looked like Marion. When I opened his chest, the sac around his heart felt tougher than it should. When I nicked the big artery coming out of the top of the heart to draw blood for lab testing, a thin red stream pushed out, spattering my glove. Leah was with me at the table that day. She'd been at Pine Ridge 3 years. Smart, calm, not easily rattled. "Come look at this," I said. She watched a few cycles of the bright red drops well up and fall. Then she grabbed the stethoscope from the wall and pressed it against the chest. We both stood there, watching the blood move and listening for something we knew shouldn't be there. After about 15 seconds, she took the stethoscope away. "Nothing," she said. "He's dead." But the blood kept coming. She pulled out her phone and filmed a short clip, careful to frame out Thomas's face and identifying features. That video never touched any official system. Later, when we were working on his brain, something else happened. His right foot turned outward on the table, not a little slump. A slow rotation of about 30 degrees, heel staying in place while the toes swung to the side. There was no one near that part of the table. No one had bumped him. The movement took about 3 seconds. "Did you see that?" Leah asked. "I did," I said. We didn't try to explain it to each other. 2 weeks later, another case came in. A 49-year-old woman named Alicia Moreno. She had collapsed at her desk at a logistics company on the north side of Fairview. Coworkers started CPR within a couple of minutes. EMS worked her for nearly half an hour. Dead on arrival. No L pacemaker, no stents, no devices. Just untreated, high blood pressure, and a family history of heart disease. Fresh-looking blood pooled in her chest. The sac and core of her heart resisted the blade. And while Leah was taking a photo of the open chest with her phone for our own record this time, not for a report, Alicia's left hand curled into a half fist, her fingers pressed in. Then, the tendons along her forearm stood out under the skin, her thumb tucked inside. Leah's phone caught the whole thing. The video shows exactly what we both saw. A motion that looks like someone slowly making a fist and then letting go. At that point, we had 3 people, 3 sudden heart deaths, 3 far too similar sets of strange findings. I wanted to tell myself we were misreading random noise, seeing patterns where none existed. But patterns are my job. I knew better. And there was a question starting to form in the back of my mind that scared me worse than anything I would ever seen on a table. What if we were cutting into people who weren't all the way gone? I kept telling myself that couldn't be true. I kept looking for proof that it wasn't. What I found instead only made things worse. That question, what if we were cutting into people who weren't all the way gone, isn't something most people ever hear a forensic pathologist say out loud. If the thought that our systems might be wrong about when life truly ends makes your stomach twist even a little, click subscribe so you don't miss where this line of cases leads. And if you're still refusing to subscribe, write in the comments why that doesn't disturb you enough to stay. Officially, all 3 reports looked boring. For Marion, Thomas, and Alicia, the cause of their death was listed as sudden cardiac death due to underlying heart disease. The toxicology reports showed nothing surprising. They were middle-aged and individuals with bad arteries. At least, that's what the paperwork said. Unofficially, Leah and I started keeping our own record. She bought a small spiral notebook and hid it behind some spare scrubs in her locker. In it, she wrote our case numbers and what we'd seen in plain language. 220471. Chest open 12 hours after ER pronouncement. Bright red blood under slight pressure. Central sac and left ventricle hard to cut. Jaw clenching. Body in new position in cooler. Repeated eye movements during ID. 220498. Fresh-looking blood from main artery over 20 hours later. Central heart tissue unusually firm. Right foot turned outward on table on its own. 220532. Heart sac and core resist cutting. Hand forms half fist. Movement on video. No devices or known structural heart disease. We backed up the videos and some photographs on a small encrypted drive. It never touched a county computer. We never mentioned it in email, nor discussed it in front of anyone else. Each time we found something new, it went into that notebook and drive. At home, I turned into a different kind of detective. I went through journal articles, old forensic case reports, even internet forums that serious professionals pretend they never read. I searched for anything that sounded even remotely like what we were seeing. I read about bodies sitting up on embalming tables because of gas shifting in the abdomen. Corpses sighing when air escaped lungs under pressure. Fingers moving as rigor made muscles go stiff, then slack. None of them involved bright blood that oozed in a near rhythm 12 or 20 hours after confirmed flat lines. None talked about hearts turning hard in less than a day, as if something had solidified inside them on purpose. None described movements that looked like slow, controlled actions, not random jerks. I pulled every bit of medical record I could for the three of them. I drew timelines, I mapped addresses on a county map. They lived in different parts of town, no shared primary care clinic, no overlapping cardiologists. They had different pharmacies, grocery stores, and churches attended in their case file. The only surface link was that all three had sudden arrests. All three had aggressive resuscitation. I called two of the doctors who had been involved. I kept my questions vague. I said to Dr. Winters, "Was there anything unusual about the rhythm? Any delay in calling it?" "No," he said. "Straightforward case. Ventricular fibrillation to asystole. No response to meds. No organized activity. Dead." "I'm just trying to make sure my report lines up exactly with your understanding," I said. "It does," he said. "Unless you're trying to tell me we missed something, doctor?" I wasn't ready to tell another medical professional that my worry wasn't that he'd missed something before she died. My worry was that something had started after. The more I read, the more dead ends I found. No articles, nor conferences, or even warning bulletins from medical professional groups. No whispered stories at meetings. If this had happened anywhere else, no one had ever put it in writing. I started waking up at night, replaying old cases in my head. The drowning, where fluid poured for minutes after we opened the chest. The man in his 50s whose hand settled off his chest 3 hours after we put him in the cooler. I'd never questioned those moments before. Now they circled in my mind and would not sit still. I wanted a pattern that would make it all make sense. A drug, a virus, or a shared clinical trial. What I had instead was a handful of cases, a hidden notebook, a thumb drive, 3 shaken professionals, and a sense that we were standing at the edge of some cliff, staring down into something dark. I hoped if I stepped back, the feeling would go away. It didn't. By April, my life outside work was unraveling quietly. I went home each night, heated up my dinner from the freezer, and set it on the table. Sometimes I ate it. Often it went cold. While I read article after article on my system, I would wake around 3 in the morning, convinced I could hear the low buzz of the cooler fan in my own bedroom. On those nights, it took a long time to remind myself there were only 2 rooms in my small condo, no steel or name tags. Leah did not look much better. Her eyes were ringed in dark circles. She jumped when the intercom buzzed or the cooler alarm chirped. More than once, I found her in the autopsy room long after we'd finished a case, staring at an empty table as if she expected someone to appear on it. "We can't just keep this to ourselves," she said. "We should tell someone." "Tell them what?" I asked. "That some of our cases aren't behaving like they should," she said. "That maybe time of death isn't as clean as we think. That we've seen." "I know what we've seen," I said. "You know what a meeting with Dr. Hammond would look like." He'd listen, nod, and say, "Interesting." Then he would send us to the employee assistance program and make a note in our files. She stared into her cup. "So we do nothing?" "We keep watching," I said. "We document what we can. If it keeps happening, if we can line it up with something concrete, then maybe there's a way to bring it forward without sounding insane." She didn't argue. That scared me more than if she had. Over the next 6 weeks, 3 more cases brushed that same pattern. None were as dramatic as Marion, Thomas, or Alicia, but each had something that felt off. A little too much firmness in the ventricle, blood that looked fresher than it should, a muscle that moved in the corner of my eye. I started to wonder how many times over 11 years I'd explained things away because the thought of the alternative was too big to fit in my head. By late May, I realized something else. The work that used to ground me was now the thing I dreaded most. I still did it. I still took careful notes, weighed organs, filled out forms, On the surface, nothing in my practice had changed. Inside, every time I lifted a scalpel over a sternum, I heard a question. What if this one moves? On June 1st, 2022, I sat at my desk, opened a blank document, and typed my resignation. I wrote that I needed to step away for personal reasons and that I planned to transition to hospital-based pathology. 2 short paragraphs. I printed and signed it and walked it into Dr. Hammond's office. He looked surprised, then more thoughtful. "Burned out?" he asked. "A bit," I said. That was true, just not in the way he meant. "We can cut back your call," he offered. "More paperwork, fewer cases." "It's not about call," I said. "I just don't think I can do this job the way it needs to be done anymore." He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded. "You're a good forensic pathologist, Jamie. If you change your mind, we'll find a place for you. But if you're sure, I'll sign this." I was sure of only one thing. Staying meant seeing more of whatever we'd already seen. I didn't know what leaving meant yet, but it felt like a way to breathe again. My last day at Pine Ridge was set for July 1st. 3 weeks later, Leah handed in her own resignation. She told Dr. Hammond she wanted to go to a reference lab and focus on surgical specimens and cytology. He tried the same half-hearted rescue speech on her. She smiled politely and shook her head. Afterward, in the parking lot, she said, "Do you think it will follow us? Whatever this is?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe it's tied to the way we work here. EMS protocols, something local." I wanted to believe we had left the worst of it behind in that concrete basement. I know now how naive that was. Sometimes walking away just means you're not there to see what happens next. When 2 people who've spent their careers with the dead quietly walk away, not because of blood or gore, but because of what they think they're seeing after time of death, that should make you stop and think. If you want to know whether they really left this behind, or just stepped into a different kind of danger, hit subscribe so you don't lose this thread. Leaving Pine Ridge felt like stepping out of a dark basement into fresh air. I took a job as a pathologist at St. Matthew's Medical Center in Aurora, Colorado. Now I looked at tiny pieces of tissue on glass slides instead of whole bodies on steel tables. The lab was bright, with big windows. I could see cars, a strip mall, and the mountains in the distance. My new coworkers were kind. Dr. Singh brought food and made everyone try some. Dr. Morales asked my opinion on hard cases, which made me feel useful again. Dr. Kelly told way too many jokes, but she could make the whole room laugh. The techs showed me where the good coffee was and which machines broke the most. Nobody asked about dead bodies. They just treated me like a normal doctor doing normal work. I moved into a small townhouse 10 minutes from the hospital. The street was quiet. Kids rode bikes, neighbors waved when I drove by. Mike and Janet next door brought me a casserole and a snow shovel the first night. Across the street, 2 kids filled the sidewalk with chalk drawings. Most evenings, people sat on their front steps and talked while the sun went down. I wasn't used to that much simple kindness. I met my partner, Casey, at the park at the end of the street. She was sitting on a bench with a book when my neighbor's dog dragged me over. Casey laughed, petted the dog, and asked if he was mine. We started talking. I later found out that she was a nurse at St. Matthew's. Soon we were running into each other at the hospital, at the coffee shop, on evening walks. Weather talk turned into stories. Stories turned into dinner. I told her I used to be a forensic pathologist but needed a change. "Too much death," I said. She didn't push for details. Some nights we sat on my front steps, watching kids play with glow sticks while the neighbors chatted. For the first time in years, I felt almost safe. The nightmares about the cooler came less often, and when I woke up shaking, Casey would put a hand on my back and say, "You're here, Jamie. It's okay." For a little while, I believed whatever had started back in that basement in Fairview was over, or at least far away. Then, one slow afternoon at the hospital, I checked my phone on a break. A news alert popped up from a small station in Pine Ridge County. The headline said, "Judge approves exhumation in questioned heart death case." The name in the first line made my mouth go dry. Local woman Marion K. Duffy. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Someone back home had started digging literally into the one case I most wanted to stay buried. I tried to tell myself the news I saw meant nothing. Maybe it was a family fight. Maybe a lawyer was trying to make money. I said all that in my head, but the tight feeling in my chest didn't go away. A week later, I came home from a late shift. The sky was dark, porch lights were on, and a moving truck was parked 3 houses down. 2 people carried boxes. A third person climbed out of the back of the truck and stretched. Even from a distance, the way she moved looked familiar. She turned her head, saw me, and called out, "Jamie?" It was Leah. Leah from Pine Ridge. Leah, who had watched a dead hand curl into a fist with me. Leah, who knew about the notebook and the videos. Now she was standing under a streetlight on my quiet street. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She gave a short, tired laugh. "I took a job at Street Matthews," she said. "They gave me this address. I was going to warn you, but I guess the universe did it for me." One of the new neighbors called from the porch. "You two know each other?" "Yeah," Leah said. "We used to work together. We helped carry a few boxes, made small talk about the hospital, the neighborhood, the weather. It all sounded normal." Her eyes didn't. Later, when the truck was gone and the street was quieter, Leah walked over to my front step. Casey was on night shift, so it was just us. "I didn't pick this place by chance," she said. "There have been more cases. Not just in Pine Ridge." My stomach dropped. "Here?" I asked. She shook her head slightly. "Close enough, but not out here on the sidewalk." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small black notebook, the same kind she used to keep in her locker at the morgue. She didn't hand it to me, she just held it like something alive. "Tomorrow," she said. "After your shift, we talk. No one else hears this. You need to see what's in here, Jamie." A car rolled past, headlights sweeping over us. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked and then went quiet. For a second, I almost told her no. I had a new job, a new home, a lovely, understanding partner and friendly neighborhood. I wanted the past to stay buried. "Okay," I said. The word came out before I could stop it. Leah nodded once. "I don't think we were the ones who moved first," she said. "I think something else did, and it's catching up." Before I could ask what she meant, a neighbor opened their door and waved, calling my name. Leah slipped the notebook back into her bag. "Tomorrow," she repeated, and walked to her new front door. I stood on my step, in a warm, safe neighborhood, and felt that old morgue cold creeping up my spine again. Whatever had started on my autopsy table hadn't stayed there, and tomorrow, when Leah opened that notebook, I was going to find out just how far it had spread. Right now, you're as close to this story as you're ever going to get. A quiet street, a familiar hospital, and a notebook full of cases that say death isn't behaving the way we're told it does. We may never know exactly what Leah showed Jamie the next day, but we do know Marion wasn't the only one. If you want more stories that shake what you think is safe and settled about life, death, and the systems you trust, hit subscribe so this isn't just another story you forget. And if you've stayed to the very end and still won't subscribe, leave a comment and tell me why you prefer to stay on the outside of this.